Greetings, everyone. Once again, it's Brother Muta Midí sharing the authentic truth brought to us by Zulula, the only teacher, the messenger, the second in the mysteries, in the hidden revelations of the word of Loba. We give thanks to Loba, the only creator of heaven and earth, for his great, glorious, and formidable, and that he lives inexplicably out of all realities. So today, the message translating, sharing, is going to be regarding a response that was given by Zulula regarding something someone says regarding the person of Christ, claiming that Christ is an old woman, and basically because that person read a passage in Proverbs. So, as you know, in Proverbs 19:2, you're told the lack of science is good for no one. And Proverbs 25:2, it is the glory of God to hide things, but the glory of kings is to investigate them. In Jeremiah 33:3 says, "Call to me, and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and hidden things that you have not known." And in John 3:11, "Truly, truly, I say to you, we speak of what we know, and we bear witness to what we have seen." And in John 8:32, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." So here, the message is going to be in the current Classical Day Bible, because there are fools out there, people who don't understand the scriptures, people who are not spiritually elevated, who have no knowledge, no spiritual understanding of the scriptures. And because there's someone who made basically a video claiming, like I've said in the introduction, that Christ is black, but that person said that Christ is an elderly woman, because that mentally challenged person, because there's a lot of also mentally challenged person who come on social media, who come to preach, claim to have the knowledge, claim to have some sort of revelations, because they're misreading, misunderstanding the passages even of the current Classical Day Bible. Because in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 30, so that's the passage that that person has read to try to argue that Christ is a woman. Because in Proverbs 8, so Proverbs chapter 8, verse 30 says this: "Then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him." So here in the message, for you to be able to understand the translation of the message, you have to understand that in the French Bibles, because the French language is of course different than the English language, in the French version of this passage, because this is regarding wisdom, and in the French, wisdom is a she, because in French, the French language, for example, the nouns have either a masculine or feminine gender. So for example, when you say the table, in French, la table, it's feminine. If you say the car, in English is it, the car. It doesn't have a gender, but sometimes some people will say she, my car, when referring to the car. But it doesn't have a gender, the car. But in French is la voiture, the car, but is feminine. So for those who understand the languages, different languages, the French language, other languages have gender based on the noun. Now, for you to also understanding a little bit better, it's, for example, when we speak regarding, for example, the earth. In French, the earth, la terre, it's feminine. And even in English, sometimes when people refer to the earth, they say she, right? The earth. But that does not mean that the earth is actually a woman, or that the earth is actually feminine, right? It's just regarding the language when we speak in the French language, for example, and even other languages, when we refer to a thing or a subject that doesn't have, or an object that doesn't have a gender, we often refer to it as a she. And in English. Now, and here in Proverbs 8:30, It says here in the New King James Version, then I was beside him as a master craftsman, semicolon. But in the French version, because the person who's speaking is speaking as a she, will say as a master craft woman. And that's the verse, the passage that person who lacked knowledge has taken to try to justify that. First, the person doesn't understand, but that person said that here it is regarding the Christ, because he says, I was beside him as a master craftsman, but in French as a master craftswoman. So that person says, no, this is regarding the Christ. And because in the French version, it says master craft woman is ouvrière, basically like a woman worker. That person says, oh, so then the Christ is a woman. You see the confusion. And when we go, that's why sometimes some people will use Christocentrism, where they will take some passages here and there, and they'll say, no, this is regarding the Christ, because they're not understanding the full passage, they don't understanding the context. That's why you have to read the chapter, you have to read the previous passages and the following passages to understand if is this regarding the Christ or who's speaking here, who's addressing. For that, we go in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 12. And you can go in any version. It says, so it's the same person who's speaking in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 30. In Proverbs 8, 12, it says, I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. You see? So it is the wisdom that is speaking. And that wisdom, when we refer to wisdom, we say she, the wisdom. When we go in the full passage in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 1 and 2, it says, do not wisdom cry out and understanding lift up her voice? Question mark. You see, it's wisdom. We refer to it, to the wisdom, as she, as her. She takes her stand on the top of the hill, of the high hill, beside the way where paths meet. All right? Because wisdom in French is sagesse, and that word, that noun has a gender, it's feminine. You see? So when the wisdom, that's why sometimes you have to understand that languages come from other languages, and sometimes they have gender-based for the nouns. And in French, wisdom, sagesse, it's a she. The noun is feminine. So when we say the wisdom, we say she. Even in English here, the wisdom doesn't have, let's say, a gender, right? But when we say when the wisdom does not wisdom cry out and understanding lift up her voice, you see, her voice, the voice of wisdom, because we're referring to that. You see, we're referring to that wisdom, and we say she, we say her. It's grammar, it's the language, is the way we speak, we refer to it, right? It doesn't mean that wisdom is an actual woman. And here in verse 3 says, she cries out by the gate at the entry of the city, at the entrance of the door. You see? So, and because the wisdom here in Proverbs 8, it's referred to as a she, as her, is the same wisdom that is speaking also in Proverbs 8, verse 30. And that's when in French is referred to as a craft woman, as a craft woman. And that person take that passage, says, oh, you see, a woman worker, craft woman. So that means, and that person didn't understand that this is referring to wisdom. That person now says, oh, this is the Christ. And it is a she. You see how people completely lack basic understanding of text, of context, of grammar. People don't even know how to read and don't understand what they're reading. So, and one of the reasons also that person will say it's the Christ is because when you go in Proverbs 8, verse 22, he says, "The Lord created me as his first course before his work of old. From everlasting I was established from the beginning before the earth began." You see? Because here he says, "The Lord created me as his first course before his work of old." So that person would say, oh, you see, his first course. From everlasting I was established from the beginning. So that person would say, oh, that can only mean it's the Christ before the earth began. Because people are in confusion, they don't understand. This is regarding wisdom, because wisdom essentially participated in creation, because wisdom was like an architect. In another version, wisdom was the craftsman. It was like a craftsman. Why? Because in order to, when you look at, let's say, the universe, the creation, you understand that there was wisdom that was also there to be intelligence, wisdom to create. You see, at the basis of creation, at the beginning. And in Proverbs 8:24-26, it says, "When there were no water in depth, I was brought forth. When no stream were overflowing with water, before the mountain were settled, before the hill, I was brought forth. Before he made the land or field or any of the dust of the earth." In Catholic Public Domain Version, it says in Proverbs 8:24, "The abyss did not yet exist, and I was already conceived. Neither land had the fountain of waters yet erupted." And verse 22 is also said, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his ways, before he made anything from the beginning." Verse 23, "I was ordained from eternity and out of antiquity before the earth was formed." So people who don't have the revelation will say, oh, this could only mean is the Christ. Because the Christ is also referred to as the firstborn. But no, because we'll reveal that a little bit later regarding what is really that wisdom, who is that wisdom that is speaking here. In verse 27, it says, so Proverbs 8:27, "I was already present when he prepared the heavens, semicolon, when, comma, with a certain law and circuit, he fortified the abyss. When he made firm the sky above and set free the fountains of waters." So this is still regarding wisdom. It's not the Christ or a female Christ. because there is not a female Christ. And in translations, in other translations, even in the French, instead of saying craftswoman, it would say craftsman. So I became near, in other versions, translation du Monde Nouveau, New World, I became near him like a skilled craftsman. Skilled craftsman. So craftsman, masculine. And then he says, and I became her. Now, how is someone is going to say like a craftsman, then I became her? So feminine. And not him. For that, you have to understand in the French language, when we say the entity, an entity, entité, then that noun, the gender is feminine. So when we say the entity did this, we'll say in French, the entity, she did that, and not he in the French language, because that noun has a gender. But that does not mean that the entity itself or himself is female. You see? It just means it's regarding the word entity in the French language. So it's just regarding grammar, conjugation, it's the language. And because some people don't understand the language, the basis, they will come up with heresies. So in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19, you're told, this is now because why was wisdom was saying, I was there from the very beginning. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19, you're told, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By wisdom. By wisdom. So wisdom was used. By understanding, he established the heaven. And you have to understand that behind that wisdom, there is an entity of wisdom. That's normal. And in Psalm when we go in Psalm chapter 104, verse 24, you're told this. How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. You see? So, in wisdom. Now, so quite simply, it was wisdom that was speaking. So we are going to go after in Kálat'a, the Authentic Bible. To show you the authentic version, exactly who is speaking. And also how that wisdom is introducing himself. So we go in Proverbs in the Authentic Bible, Bibèl, and I'll translate here. Chapter 8, verse 12. So the title of this passage is "The Entity of Wisdom Introduces Himself." In verse 12 it says, "Me, the entity of wisdom, I do not separate myself from the entity of discernment, and I am with the entity of science and the entity of reflection." You see, I repeat again, me, or I, the entity of wisdom, I do not separate myself from the entity of discernment, and I am with the entity of science and the entity of reflection. So, because you have to understand that before the world existed, the visible world, our reality, the entity of wisdom was already manifested, created. Before the earth, before the soil, before. That's why even it says in some passage in the current Bible, before the abyss. So even before the first Adam. Because you need wisdom to create even the most ancient things. You need wisdom to create the heavens, the sky, the earth, the ocean, so all that. So it is not the Christ in Proverbs 8, it is the wisdom. And that entity was created before our world, because the entity of the great order of things were manifested in the great order of things, and that reality is before our reality. So that's why even in the current Bibles you're told, I was ordained in Proverbs 8:23. I was ordained from eternity and out of antiquity before the earth was formed. Before the earth was formed. So that was the message to correct some misguided, fake teachers claim, or that fake teacher claim, that person who made that claim that Christ is a woman. So that was the message. That was the message. All glory be to Loba, the only and unique creator.